Hello everybody, my name is Avery and today we're covering all the basics of Python. If you're ever interested in Python, if this is your first year at school and you're going to start studying programming, or if you're not in school and you want to learn how to code, this is a great video for you. In this video we're going to be covering getting Python, setting it up, and a lot of basic stuff that's used in everyday use cases when programming. A lot of things you'll learn in this video. They're for Python specifically, but they can be used in different languages as well. So once you learn them today, you should be able to implement them in the future in Python and other languages. So why Python? Python is friendly, it's easy to use, and simple to use as well. For the most part, people say that Python, it's an easier but also a slower language. It runs slower, it's not as complex, and if I were you, I would just ignore all that. For the most part, it's not that much slower. It's not that much slower for most of the things you need to use. It's somewhat quicker to write. As you learn syntax, as you learn the grammar, basically of the language, you'll get a hold of it for basically any language. And with that said, basically all languages are very similar. So I would say just learn Python and then you can pick up other things afterwards. So you don't really have to worry too much about the language itself. But of course, for this video, we'll be doing Python. So we're here on the Python website. It's python.org. And with that said, everything we'll be talking about is going to be linked in the description for those who are following along. So python.org, it has things like the documentation and tutorials on how to use Python. But what we're going to be looking at is the downloads. If you need to download Python, I would go ahead and just click it right here. You can get it set up on Windows, Linux, or Mac, or your other operating system. There's a high chance it's already installed on your computer. If you know how to open up a terminal, mainly for Linux and Mac, you should be able to, if you know how to open the terminal, you should know how to install it. It's probably already installed, and you can run Python. If you click tab a few times, it might show different versions you have. In this video, we're going to be specifically covering over functions in Python that's using Python 3. Python 2 is a little bit older. It's a little bit different, although for the most part, it's pretty similar. So when you run it, just make sure it says Python right here. This is the Python command line. We can also save files as Python files and then run those files, which is what we're going to be doing. So to leave the Python command line, it's just exit with these open and close parentheses. So as you can see, that's the version number. If you don't want to install it, don't worry at all. There's plenty of websites that actually let you type up Python code and then run it. So here's our Python code. We click run, and it ran just like that. You can go ahead and copy that. You go in here and paste it, and it runs it just as well. And now we can actually just go in whatever text editor that you want. I'll just open up this notes, basically. We can paste that in. We click save, and I'll just do test.py, and we can overwrite that. And now if we go in here, we can just do Python and then test.py. As you can see, it ran the code that was in the file. So that's what we're going to be doing for the most part. We're going to be having our code in a file, and we're just going to be running it. But along with that said, you can basically follow along with everything just via the web. I wrote up everything in a markdown file. It generated an HTML and a PDF. HTML, I guess the format was a little bit wrong, but if you look here at the PDF, it's a little bit better to view, and you should be able to follow along everything afterwards with this as well. And here's the links. I guess the links aren't super noticeable in the PDF version, but I'll make it look a little bit nicer by the time you guys view this when I have some free time. So you can follow along this way as well. We're going to cover basically everything that's in the documentation in today's video. So with that said, take a little bit of time to just get ready to learn how to program a little bit, and take a little bit of time also to install and download Python for yourself. And we can actually go ahead and just get started. So I'm going to jump into a directory that I have already created. This directory, for the most part, it's empty. It has the stuff that I mentioned before that we're going to be covering over. And I'll just have this file. We'll call it test.py. So we have our file right here. It's under test.py. Once again, we can go ahead and copy this, paste it in there, save it, and then just run test.py like that, and it should run. So let me toss the terminal over here. We'll clear that. We'll get ready to run it, and let's make this a little bit bigger. So what this is actually doing, it's plain and simple. It's just printing out hello world, but we're going to get back and explain how some of this works. In Python, there's a bunch of data types. Data types is basically a way of saying how information is stored. Say you have information like John, that's someone's name. You have their age. Say you have their height. It's 1.8 meters. And then say you also want to keep track of something as true or false. You can do true. And it's going to be just like that. So these things all have names. John is a string. You put that in quotes. And that's what you could see right here. Hello world, it's in quotes. It could be double or single quotes, just like that. It doesn't really matter too much. 30, that's an integer. So when you have a number, that's a whole number, it's an integer. And when you have a number that's not a whole number, it's, in most languages, it's either called a double or a float. In Python, we're calling it a float. And in Python, a true or a false, it's a Boolean, or shorter term is bool. So it's going to be like, that's the name of it, and these are the names, an int for short, for integer, and a string. Except for you don't actually need to state what it is, you just need to say what you want it to be called. So you can do name equals, you can do age equals, and you can do height equals that. And you can do is male. So this is just some information about this guy named John. The line breaks don't matter too much, except for we'll cover that a little bit about spacing and line breaks and tabs as we get into that. So it doesn't matter too much about the line breaks as I mentioned, but here is our code. We can go ahead and run it. And as you can see, it ran and nothing outputted. That's because we're not actually displaying anything. There's nothing that's actually happening. So we go ahead and run this function. This function is called print. It's a function that's just built into Python. You know it's a function because it's a word, and then it has an open and lowercase. It has an open and close parentheses. You can call a function just by running it like that. We can go ahead and actually try this out. And it printed an empty line. So now what we want to do is pass something into this parentheses. So you can pass in the word name, and it'll pass it in. You can usually break up everything by commas and paste a bunch of things in. And usually when you put a comma in, it'll break it up with spaces. So as you can see, it printed out everything just like that. If you want to combine something, you can also combine it this way, and you can even put quotes in, so this way you can manually put in the spaces. But when you do this, it's going to cause a bit of a problem because Python wants everything to be the same data type. So this one's name is a string, but this one's an age. So what we can do is cast them. Casting just means we're converting them. So we can just do string that way, and this one will be short for string also. So this is basically just making it so they convert into a string. And you can set this cast to other things as well. This one's 1.8. We can cast that to an integer to make it a whole number, and then cast it to a string, just like that. And we go ahead and run it. And now you can see it's a whole number. If you get rid of that and run it like that, it's the float, and it has the decimal points afterwards. So it's as simple as that. You just want to make sure that they're using the same data types when you combine things together. Because of course you can't do John plus 30. That doesn't make sense in English, so it's not going to make sense in Python. So now that you have this, let's say you want to take user input. You can print out something, but let's actually load something in. We can do John, and we can change this right here, and it'll do input. And so this is a function that'll take something in. So now we can go ahead and run it, and now it's waiting for our input. My name's Avery, put in Avery, now it says Avery, just like that. We can actually put something in here. You can say, what is your name? Put a space right there. And now when you do it, it says, what is your name? I'll pass it in. So you could actually change this input for every single one of these, and you'll be able to load in every single one of them basically manually. So sometimes that's useful. Sometimes you'll want to have the values already set up in your code, and sometimes you want the user to send in those values. So input is a function similar to print, but instead of outputting something, it lets you store something. It lets you input it. Now we're going to talk about control flow. As you can see right now, your code runs line by line. It starts at 1 and goes all the way to 6. If you were to have this up here, before the values are defined, you can see right here, it's going to crash because, as you can see, age is not defined, because right here you want it to print age, but age isn't anything. Along with height and ismail, they're going to be the same thing. So the flow of the code just goes in order as you type it. But there's ways that we're going to discuss on breaking up this code and making it so you can do things over and over. Let's say if the user is over the age of 5, we can print out something. So let's just say hello if the user is older than 5. So to do that, you can use an if statement. If is just for checking a value of something. You can do if age is greater than 5, and then you end it with a colon. And then this is where you need a space. You can do a space, you can do a tab, you can do as many as you want, but you need to make sure that that amount that you do, in this example it's 2, you need to use that for all other indentations. So as right here you can say, so that's 2 spaces, you can do else. So right here you need to have 2 spaces right here. So you can just put by, like that. So you need to make sure it's the same amount of spaces. If you had 3 spaces, or if you have a tab, it's going to give an error. And that goes the same, and say you have another if statement, and here you check something, you need to do 2 more spaces out. So you're going to have a bunch of lines of code indenting further and further in. With this is a Python only thing, you just need to make sure that the indentation is correct. So now we go ahead and run it, and what is your name? And we can say our age is 2. And, so that's, okay, so inputs as a string, we need to change this to an integer, because you can't compare a string and an integer. Okay, now it said bye. If we were to do 10, it says hello. As you can see, the number is greater, so it's true. You can do ismail, and that just takes in the true or the false. All right, there, we had to put something in. But it just sets it to true, so then it worked automatically. So you can do age is greater, age is less. Maybe I said those backwards. You can do equals. You can do equals 10. Set it to 10. It said hello. If you set it to 1, it says bye. So those are things you can check. You just need to make sure that you cast things so that you're using the correct thing. If it's an integer, make sure that they're integers for sure. If it's string, make sure they're strings for sure. So you can do if name equals Bob. You just do Bob. Oh, it needs to be an integer right there. Bob says hello. If it's not Bob, it'll say bye. So it's as simple as that. It's pretty easy to use. Another thing that we can do as well, let's scrape all of this, is you can use a loop. A loop is when you do something repetitive. Say you want to print the numbers 0 to 1. You can do for, so it's called a for loop. You can do I. So I is the name of the variable that we're going to be using. And you can do in range. So range is another one of these functions that's built into Python. And you can do 10. So now we do indent out just 1 for this one, and we'll just print I. So right here we run it. It starts from 0 and prints all the way to 9. That's because in almost all languages, when you count, you'll start at 0. So just imagine that 0 is 1 and this 9 is 10. So that's just something you need to notice and know about when you go ahead and try to do math and things. Of course, I guess just doing basic math, it's going to start at 1, of course. 1 is 1. But when you have a list of items, you know that the first item in the list is going to be 0. And we're going to see that further down the line. So that's a for loop. We'll cover a little bit more on how to use for loops a little bit further in the video. But you can also define the variable, and you can do while. So it's a while loop. So while I and 5. So just like that, print I. So this is just going to repeat forever because in this case, I isn't increasing. So to increase it, you need to increase it by 1. So you can do math this way. Of course, you can do math just regularly. You can do I equals I plus 1, just like that. But you can actually just do that, and all means it adds it. You can do that for multiplication, division, basically anything. So we'll go ahead and run this. As you can see, it started at 0 and it went all the way to 4. So that's just another way to loop something. So if you have something repetitive, if you want to do a task or do through a range of numbers, that's how you can do it. As of now, we've used range, print, input, and these are all Python functions. What happens if you want to create something on your own? That way you can create your own function, you say def, and then you say the name of your function. We can do a function that does addition. We'll just call it add. And in this one, we're going to take two variables. We'll take a variable A and a variable B. And we'll just return the addition of both of these variables. You can do A plus B, and it'll just work like that. You can also do this. You can do C equals A plus B, just like that. And now we'll just print. So we're going to display what the output is. We'll run add, and we'll do 1, 2. So as we know, that's going to display 3. As you can see right there, it worked. We can make this its own variable and print it out like that. And this is how you just make your own functions for anything. If I were you, I would actually go ahead and just make a bunch of functions for different math equations and whatnot. So a more complex one that could be a math equation is y equals mx plus b. So this is just for me to look at it. We can actually turn this into a comment. We do a pound or a hashtag. It's going to actually ignore that. So that's how you comment out code, and that's how you write comments for yourself. So let's just break this up. That's going to be multiplication. So the function, we'll just call the function y, because that's what it's returning. And we want to pass in m, x, and b. So actually, I'll just call it a line. And then we'll set y equals to, just make it a little clearer, just like that. And we just return y. So that's a simple function that we just created. We can do L equals line 1, 2, 3. Print L. Let me go ahead and run that. Oop. Forgot one thing. Make sure they have a colon right there. And as you go run it, that's what's generated from y equals mx plus b, passing in these values. You can also pass in values this way. You can declare what they are, just like that. And if you want default values, you can also do it like that. And if you have a default value, you can actually just ignore that one. You don't have to pass it in unless you want to. But if there's no default value in your function, you have to pass in the value for that. But it's as simple as that. There's people who have different ways of organizing their code, different ways of wanting to have it laid out. You'll see maybe in the future for a teacher or a job, they might want you to have it broken up like this, so it's a little bit more clear. You can see line by line. Of course, mx plus b, mxb are very short variable names, but you'll probably have longer ones in the future. Sometimes people want descriptive variable names, things like that. I mean, one might want this one to be called the y-intercept, and I guess I don't know. I can't remember what they all mean, basically. But they might want them like that. They might want them in alphabetical order. It just depends on what you're doing and how you want to organize yourself. So that's that for that. There's functions that you can actually import from other people. So as we can see, print is built into Python. But there's other things that are imports or libraries. And the library has other pre-built functions that are made by others. For the most part, a lot of these libraries are already installed on your computer, at least for basic stuff like math. And you can actually go ahead and install different libraries. There's a program called pip. You should be able to install it easily. Pip3 is for Python 3. You can just do install, and then you can write the name of the package that you want installed. But in our case, the package we're using should be already on your computer. It's going to be called import math. So now this math function, the functions that are in this math package, they're going to be imported for us to use. So we can actually test out one of those, and that one is going to be math. So you have to do the name of it, and then dot, and then square root, and that's how you call it. It's the math function for a square root is sqrt. Let me go ahead and run this, and As you can see, there is the square root of 16. It's as easy as that. Okay, moving on, we're talking about lists, tuples, and dictionaries. So a list is as simple as you think. Think of a grocery list. You have apples, bananas, oranges, bread. So as we know, in Python, we need to have quotes around these because they're strings. So let's just quickly do that. And we're just going to break them up by commas. You can have a space if you would like. They can actually be on multiple lines as long as they're broken up correctly. But a list opens and closes with a square bracket. So it's just like that. This is a list. But we actually need to save this list to something. We'll just call groceries, just like that. So now we have a list of groceries, and right here we can do print groceries. So now we should be able to have this list, and we should be able to print it. As you can see, it was printed just like that. And remember earlier when I said that the numbers begin at 0, especially in a list. So this is the first one. That means it's actually 0. So if you want to look at one specifically, you can have the brackets like this. You can put 0 in there, and it'll print it. And as you can see, it printed apples quickly. And that's the same thing looking back at our loops. Remember, we have for I in range. We can do for I in range of groceries. And we can go ahead and just print I. List object. For I, and my bad. Let's just do for I in groceries. As you can see, it printed everything. It printed this one, apple, twice because it's still here. But it printed everything that was in there. You can change the name of this as you want. You can change that to item, that to be item, and it's as simple as that. A tuple, it's kind of similar to a list, but a tuple, it's not going to have square brackets. It's going to be parentheses. And I guess this is there's more details about this as you can study, but we'll just call it my tuple, and we'll set this to 1, 2, 3, 4. As we know, this is a string, but you can have other information in here as well. We'll have 1 in there, and let's run that. And we can print the tuple as well, so print my tuple, and it's going to print it out just the same. You can also have a dictionary. So what do you think is going to be a dictionary? How is it going to be different than a list? That's because you're going to have the name of something, and you're going to define it. So you can have the word and what it means, but it's not just a word. It can be anything. A dictionary, let's say it's an address book. You have name, you have number, and maybe you have their street. So we have the street, and how are we going to define all this? Remember to put quotes around everything. And now we want to actually define what they are. So the street is going to be, I don't know, Main Street. And then their phone number can be 817, blah, blah, blah. And their name can be Joe. So this is a dictionary. You have something that's assigned to something else. And we're going to actually put this all inside of the curly brackets. And we want to break up these ones with commas. They can be on the same line. They can be broken up. Same thing with all these up here. So we can have this one as contact, and we'll save it as that. So you can do print contact. And see, the contact is printed just like that. And let me double check this. If we put 0, yeah, it's going to have an error. But if you put name, it'll go ahead and give you the name for that contact, just like that. So there's some cool stuff you can do with this. Imagine you can actually make a function that's called create contact. And in the contact, you pass a name, you pass a number, and you pass their street. And now we'll just actually pull up this contact right here and make sure that this is, let's just bring this in. It'll be one line. And in here, we're going to assign name to name. We'll assign number to number, and street to street. Now let's just return contact. So now when we pass in, we call this function create contact. We'll pass in Bob. We'll pass in his number. Let's make sure his number is a string. Even though it's a number, we're going to store it as a string. We'll pass in 1, 2, 3. And we can say his street is also Main Street. Now this is going to generate a contact, and it's going to be called that. what we can do is have contacts. We can have a list of contacts, and we'll just set it to empty. So we can do contacts like that. And to add it to this contact, we can do contacts.append. So that's a function for the list. And it'll add it like that. So let's go ahead and try this a few times. Okay, so we just have all these contacts, they're all added on, and we can just do print contacts. So remember, this contacts is with an S. It's not the same thing as this contact. And we can go ahead and run this. And as we can see, hope that's a little clear, we have a list. It's the square brackets. And in that list, we have different contacts. So we can actually do for contact in contacts, print contact. You can also do 0. That's going to print the first one, Bob. As you can see, it printed Bob right here. That's for this line. And then the other line went through and printed all these manually. We can do street like that. And let's go ahead and run it. And it printed out all their streets. So that's a cool way to use dictionaries, functions, variables, and list all within one single project, basically. Now let's say you have some of this information in a file. We're not going to cover too much about parsing files and whatnot, but let's say you have a file. I'll just make a quick file right here. It's called test.txt. We'll have hello world. We'll just have this in our file. And let's go ahead and delete this. We want our code to be able to load this file called test.txt. You do with open, and then you'll pass in the name of this right here. So it's going to be test.txt. And then you want to tell it what you're doing with that. We're going to do W for write, R for read, A is for all. With that noted, I want to quickly say something. If you're writing to a file, if you write something into it, it's going to override everything in the file. If you have a W, if you have an A, it should be able to use to just attach it to the end of the file, basically. And we can actually test that out. But first, let's just read the file. So we can read it as file. And then here, let's indent to end. We can do, let's just print out what's in the file. And we can do file.read, just like that. And now let's run it, and there's our file. Our file actually has this extra line at the end, so that's why it printed out the extra line at the end, just like that. And let's go ahead and write to this file. We can do with open again. We'll just have this separate, so it can be a separate example. tx.t. We can do write, and then as file, and we'll just do file.write, and then I'm going to say hi. So as I mentioned, the W, I believe it's going to override it. As you can see right there, it was overwritten. We'll change that to world, and let's add A right there, and let's try that again. Okay, as you can see, it just attached it instead of replacing it. That's because write only has permission to write to something, so it doesn't actually know what's in there. But when you give it the read and write permissions, it knows what's in there, so it's able to not overwrite what's in there. This isn't a Python thing, but if you do that, it's going to break it up into a new line. So you can see there's a new line there, and every time you run that, there's going to be a new line. So that's just something for you to know. What if you have an error in your code? We've already looked at this a little bit, but let's just say we have x equals 5 plus hello. As you know, this is not going to work. That's not the same type of variable, and there we ran into this problem. It usually spits out what the error is. It says, oh, this is the line. It even says the line number. As we can see in our editor, we can look at the line number, and it says unsupported operand type for plus. So this plus, you can't do an int and a string together. So let's try to make it so we can actually not have this error in our code, even though we have it ran. So say you're trying to load in a file, you're trying to do something that could cause a problem. You want to pass it into a try and an except or a catch. This is something, we're doing it in Python, but this is something that's also in multiple languages. So we're just going to try it, and if there's an error, it's going to give out the error. Let's do something different. In this one, we'll do x equals 5 divided by 0. And as we know, you can't divide by 0, so let's just do 0 division error. and you do print, and you say cannot divide by 0. So let's just try that out. Right there, cannot divide by 0. Instead of the program crashing, it just gave out this error instead. You can put that up here, and because it's not in the try error area, it's going to crash. And now it says crash right there, and it actually shows you what the error is, 0 division by error. And if we look up here, I guess this is a type error. So we could have done right here, we do just change that again. Let's get rid of this. Let's change this to type error. So you know what type of error it is, and then let's just write error like that. And as you can see, it spit out the error. So as you go, you kind of learn stuff and learn what you need to use. That's just a way to catch an error. Instead of your program actually catching, it spits out an error. And as you can see, I mean, it looks like the program still crashed, but you can actually continue down here. Your program should be able to keep running. So let's have it print ABC. But if you had this, let's just go ahead and get rid of this, x equals. And if you run that, it's just going to crash and your program's not going to run at all. So that's just one way of doing that. There's something that's pretty popular. If you ever heard of, you know Python, if you're going to school, you probably heard of object-oriented programming. It's a style of programming, and it's more than just a style. It's characteristics of your program that are available in most languages to help you organize your code. I'm just going to show it to you because showing it to you is just the simplest way of doing it. Say you want to code something for a game, and in your game you have a dog. So you have a class, and the class is what the object is, or what the object's going to be based on. So we have class dog, and then we want to indent. I'll use a tab for this one, and we'll define a function. Whenever you create the dog, it'll run the functions that are within this class called dog. On creation, it'll automatically run this function called init. You don't need to ever run it yourself. It'll just run it. You do self. Self is just the dog itself. This isn't a variable that you need. You do name and age. Let's indent in one more time. So self name equals name, and self.age equals age. Let's go back here. So we're indented the same amount. So this is still within the dog class. We'll do def bark. We can do self like that, and we'll just do print woof like that. So now these are a function of dog. I mean, the functions within the dog class. So now, if you have a dog, you can call it Pippin, and you can say Pippin is a dog, and let's define its name. I guess it, name's right there, and its age can be 23. So when you do this, it's automatically going to run this init function, and it's going to save these two values just like that. And now you can do print dog.name. It's going to print the name, and you can also do dog.bark. So you can call the dog's function. So as you can see right here, this is kind of like that math thing we did earlier, math square root. So it's basically something that is in something. It's just a dot. So this is actually Pippin, my bad. And this one will be Pippin as well. It can use whatever you want it, but this way you can run that, and you print out the name. That's the name that you passed in. That's this one, and you also call the function woof. So this can be used for a variety of things. Not everyone enjoys doing it, but it's a good way to organize your code. You can do class math. I mentioned earlier you can make a bunch of math functions. Let's just go ahead and put all of our math functions inside of here. You can do AB, and you can do return A plus B. You can do def multiply. You can do AB, and return A times B. So now we want to create an object using this class. We can just do m equals math, and we can just do m add 1, 2. Let's go ahead and print that. And right here needs a colon. Okay. Must be 3. Okay, let's make sure this is the correct way. Okay, Yeah, I just forgot the self. But as you can see, we just did some addition right there. You can change that one to multiplication. So this is a way for you to make your own functions that are within a similar scope that you can share with people. This is something that's more advanced also, and it could be covered in later videos as well. So let's go ahead and delete all of this. And let's talk a little bit about regular expressions. Actually, out of everything we'll be covering, the stuff with object-oriented, regular expression now, and we're also going to look at a little bit of debugging afterwards. They're all very broad, big topics that we're just quickly looking at. So to do regular expression stuff, you'll import a library. It's called RE for regular expressions. And if you aren't familiar, regular expressions are a way to view text or view data and parse the data, basically, using regular expressions. It's kind of a complex thing. It's something that doesn't look super familiar, so because of that it can be a little hard. We'll just have this variable right here. We'll call it text. We can do my phone number is 555-555-555, just like that. And now we can do phone number, and of course you can just repeat the phone number. Let's say we want to parse this data. Let's say we want to use it and collect the phone number from here. We can do RE search. So this is just something quickly that we're going to cover, and we'll just do R just like that, and we'll pass in text. So in here is going to be the actual regular expression that we're going to be looking through, and we're looking for something that has 3 digits, and then pass this slash again. It'll be 3 digits and then a dash. Of course, these dashes are the ones that are up there, and then 4 digits, just like that. And let's just print out phone number, just like that. Okay. And so it returns this type of variable. We can do a group like that, and it's going to be what we're looking for. And here it is. So this is actually an object too. Earlier, if we had printed out the Pippin, or if we had printed out math, it would probably print out something similar to this. But regular expressions is pretty complex, but as you can see, it's used for parsing and pulling out information from strings and text and data. You can run it against files and stuff like that. And debugging and testing, this is something else to do with error problems or whatnot. Let's import this called PDB. It's the Python debugger. There's other things in other languages that are pretty similar. So we just do the Python debugger, and we'll do add. We'll just quickly do this function we had earlier, and return a plus b, and we'll just print add a plus b, 1, 2, like that. So you can see that runs. And in here, let's enable our Python debugger for this part. We'll do set trace. So the debugging is just a way to testing your code, finding problems. So as here, it pulls out the Python debugger at this spot. I actually, off the top of my head, I don't remember everything that needs to be done with the Python debugger. But yeah, this is something that's pretty complex, or it can be complex, but you just want to use it for debugging your code. So if you ever had to figure out what's happening in a certain part of your code, and the error message isn't good enough, I would look up how to use PDB, or the Python debugger. And there's also, earlier we had a list of numbers. We'll call it numbers. And we know this is what a list looks like. There's ways to also generate and alter a list just like this. We can call, let's say, squared numbers. Let's create a list of all these squared numbers. What you could do is make an empty list, and then you just do for in numbers. And then you do squared numbers dot append. So it's just going to attach it to our numbers. We can do in times 2, and that's going to square it. And we can just do print squared numbers like that. So that's one way, let me shrink this down, that we've looked at that makes sense. But there's a way to basically compact this whole entire thing. In here, in our square bracket, we can give it the multiplication that we're going to do. We can do in times 2. And we can put this in here. So a for in numbers. So basically it's just doing what it is, and it's doing the calculation, and we're passing in numbers, so it'll do that as well. So let's go ahead and try that. As you can see, you got the exact same way. So this is a way just to do a compact single liner thing just right against your list. You have a list, you want to do some sort of multiplication to it, you want to pass some sort of algorithm basically to it. This is the way to do that in a short form. Let's say this n222, you're squaring the number. But let's say you want to have a quick function. You don't want to actually write out square root. You don't want to do all that. You don't want to define the function. But you do want to have something quickly written. But it's a little bit more defined than just having it written right there. You can use something called lambdas. Lambdas is also something that it's not super complex, but it's a more advanced thing. So it might look complex, but it's something that's in a lot of languages. So we can call it square root. Actually, let's just try out the one that I had in my example in the code, lambda, and we can do x, just do ab like we've been doing, and then we'll just do x, a plus b, just like that. And now when you go to print, it's just going to, you call the function, add, and you do 5,7, so it's actually, run that. As you can see, it printed 5 plus 7. We can do square root. We can do lambda, ab, actually just a, and it's going to return a times 2. So right here, you can do square root n. As you can see, it did the same thing. So this is a lot simpler than doing def, square root, and blah, blah, blah. It's just something for short-term use. You just want to quickly write it out. Of course, it's longer than just doing that right there, but it's a way to have it a little bit defined, showing what you're doing a little bit clearer, basically. Let's say we have this list right here. There's ways of altering this list and doing things with it. There's a function called map and filter. They're both Python built-in functions that allow you to apply a function to each element of an iterable list, or to filter the elements of an iterable based on a condition. So we have these numbers, just like that, and we can do squared numbers. So this is going to be a different way of doing it, basically. We can say list, and we can say map. So in this map function, it's just going to run it against this numbers, and this list function is actually just going to generate a new list. So we're going to use the lambda that we had before, x times 2, and then numbers. So you're basically giving it your function, and it's just applying, the map is going to apply it against numbers. And then you're using this list function to generate that new list. You can even do even numbers. So we're going to use filters, not just for applying something against everything in a list, it's actually going to filter out that list. So we can generate a list, and then here we need to call filter. And we'll just quickly do lambda. And we need the result of x, and x is going to be anything modulus of 2 that equals 0. So equals just means that it equals it. It's going to return true or false. If you aren't familiar, this is just a way of saying if something is even or not. So we'll just pass in numbers like that. And let's just go ahead and print this. Square numbers, and print even numbers. So you can see, square the numbers and also got the even numbers. You can pass in square numbers right here. It's going to be a little bit different. You got the even numbers from this list instead. So that's just something to show you how to use map and filter. Map is for applying something to a list, and filter is for filtering out information in a list. There's also list slicing. Let's go ahead and look at that. Say you have this whole list, but you only need the first couple values in it. You can let's just print it out, numbers like that. And as we know, right now you can do 0, it'll pull out the first one. You can do 4, it's going to pull out the 5th one, like that. But let's say you want to get out a range of them. We'll do 1 through 3, like that. And it got the second one, which is 1, and it did that until the third one, which is, I guess, that one, technically the 4th. But it stopped at that one, so it just got 2 and 3. There's different combinations of things you can do with this. Let's just try 3 and see what that does. 1, 2, 3, it got the first 3. If you do -3, it's going to not include that one. You can have it on this side, and that's going to get everything after 3. You can try -3 right there. It's going to do it this way. So that's just ways of parsing out what you want in a list, basically. And let's say we have 10 right here, and 20, and 5 and 7, so there's 2 different 5s. As you can see, this isn't a numerical order. That's okay, it depends on what you want it for, but let's say you want to have it in the correct order, you can do numbers.sort, like that. And numbers.sort, so that return none. Just make sure this is correct. Sorted, print numbers. Okay, for whatever reason that was returning none. If you guys are more familiar with Python and you know why that was returning none, just go ahead and, oh, nope, I did that wrong still. Just call this real quickly. Okay, I believe this should be sorting out this list. It's not, so I'm going to actually just ignore that for right now. If you guys know why, just leave a comment in this below. We can talk about string formatting a little bit. We have the name. We can do input, and just say name, just like that. We can do age. We'll just set the age to 20. We want to format a string. We want to say hi, and we want to put the name. So to do that, you can just do these curly brackets. You are, and that's going to be the age. You can just do format like this, and we can pass in name and pass in age like that. So you pass in the name, Avery. Okay, hi Avery, you are 20. So you can see it just replace these curly brackets with the value they passed in to format. Moving on, there's different ways to also edit strings and whatnot. We can have text. We can say hello world, like that. Let's print out the text, and then let's go ahead and copy this a few times so we can do different variations of it. You can do upper, that's going to make it all uppercase. You can do lower, it's going to make it all lowercase. We can also split it, and this is going to split it into, by what you're passing it in, it's going to split it into a list, basically. So it has all uppercase, all lowercase, and as you can see, here's a list of all the words. So that's a good way of breaking up words. If you had a comma like that, and you did it by comma, it splits it up that way. So it's simple as that. These are just a few functions for altering your text a little bit. If you guys are also have heard of Python, maybe you've heard of something called JSON or JSON, spelled like that. A JSON file is a way to keep in data, store information. It's like what we did earlier when we looked at contacts. We have an example file right here, and it's right here. This is the format of it. We're not going to cover too much, but basically this is a way to store some information. So you have it stored in a separate file, and in your Python file you can usually look through it. This isn't something that's related to Python at all, but it's something that's pretty popular. There's other formats also. This is a JSON format. There's other formats for storing information. But we're just going to quickly look at JSON. So there's a JSON library. And we'll just say data. We don't actually even need to read in the file. We can have our own. We'll just have name. And this is going to be a dictionary. John. And we'll just do age. And then John is 30. And you can do JSON data. And we'll just say JSON dumps data. Like that. And now you're going to do print the JSON data. Okay, and you can't tell too much of a difference, but that's in Python. It's JSON now. We're not going to cover everything on how to do everything with this, basically, but there's a lot you can do. Once your data is stored and organized, there's a lot you can do with it. And I got something we'll probably cover in a future video. We can do with open, and we can do data.json. If it's in a different directory on your computer, just do whatever directory you're in. On Windows, it's probably like formatted differently, but just have it point at the correct file. We'll just do read, and we'll just do as file, just like that. This is in the same directory as this file that I printed out, so it's going to work correctly. And I'm running in the same directory. So you can just do JSON load, like that, and let's just load in our file. Just quickly run that. So this right here is going to be a comma. Alright, so that worked. Now right here, let's print out the data. And as you can see, it has dumped out everything that was in the file. it's not as organized as it was before, but that's because we're trying to do calculations and stuff on this information. It doesn't need to be super organized. But we can also look, we can see there's something called name. So we can do right here, and we can say name. So as you right there, it is printed out the name. There's name, there's the address. Let's print that out. Address. And see, in address, it actually has more information. So what you can do is have this one like that, and you can say city. And there, it's any town. So from the address, you get the city. As you can see, so this is basically just a list within a list. Say you have n like that, and you have a list like that and like that. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like a 2D list. Sometimes people use it. You can use it for like if you're making a game with a grid or something. You can just imagine it like the rows and the columns that are in the list. And it's one way. And of course, another way of imagining it is just how this JSON file has it stored right here. So that's just some use cases for that. Moving on, there's plenty of built-in functions that are already on your computer when you install Python. One of them is about time stuff. So we can do import date time. And say you know what you want to import it, you can actually do from date time. You can do that. So you know what you want from it. And you actually set it as something if you want. You can change it to DT. So now it's going to import date time, but you're only importing date time from date time, which I know they're two separate things. This date time belongs to this date time. And we're going to save it as DT. So we're going to just do now equals DT now. And we can do print now. And there's plenty of things you can do with this. But let's just do now.year. Just like that. Alright, so printed now, and it printed the year as well. So that's just something quickly I wanted to look at. The final thing we're looking at is called Enumerate. Enumerate is a built-in function that allows you to iterate over a list and also keep track of the index of the current item. This topic will cover on how to use this over a list, basically. So let's just say we have fruits, and then fruits we have apple, and then we have a banana, and then we have a cherry. So this is a list with fruits. So what we can do is for index, you can actually have two different things. So we're going to do index fruit, and we'll do enumerate, and then fruits, like that. And then we're just going to print out both of them, index and fruit. So the index is going to be like what step we're on and what the variable is. Oh, maybe I spelt that wrong. Okay, like that. There. As you can see, it says what number it is and what the value is. So this is because this function can actually return two things. I didn't mention that, I guess, before, but if you have a function, you can have it return a tuple of information. This is a little bit different, but basically it's going to return the index and the fruit. So this is the last thing I wanted to cover. In case you have a list that you wanted to keep track of the value and the index of what that value is at, you want to use enumerate. There's plenty of things you can do with Python. It's a huge language. There's tons of libraries and add-ons that people have created on how to basically do infinite amount of stuff. You can make games, you can analyze data, you can do machine learning and AI stuff, you can do back-end for websites, you can even generate front-end for websites. I believe there's even front-end live code that works now in Python for websites. Technically, you can make apps with it. For phones, it's probably a little bit more complicated to do that because that's not what it's designed to do, and phones aren't designed to take it in that way. But you can make applications for your computer, both web-based and GUI-based, like the website. I mean, you can do basically any sort of application can be made in Python. If you're interested in making games, I would suggest watching my video right here. We're going to be covering a library for making games called PyGame. We're just going to be covering some of the basics for it. But hopefully this video, you found it useful. Once again, everything in the description. All of this code that we looked at today will be in the description as well. And yeah, go ahead and check out PyGame if you guys want to learn more about Python. Thanks again for watching, and see you guys again next time. Bye.